Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first Global Voices of the semester. This is where you cheer. Come on, help me out. All right. We do have a great lineup for Global Voices this fall. Before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and do something, a little housekeeping. If you're an undergrad student, there is combo credit today. There's combo credit for other events as well. Sean, Michael, you raise your hands. You'll need to find them after the event to make sure you get your combo credit. I want to just point out a couple of the Global Voices this fall. You can sign up for them online. All of them really are free meals if you haven't joined us before. It is true. Dr. Saji Lukos is going to be with us. He leads a Reaching India ministry. It's a large ministry within India. He lives in Chicago at the moment. He's going to be sharing a message called A Call to Risk Your Life to Change the World. Don't wimp out. Come to this one. I think it's going to be fantastic. We're going to have later this semester, Dr. Bryant Wright is going to be with us of Send Relief. And then just draw attention to one of these. And by the way, you will be handed out a list of Global Voices very soon. We have alumni who, one is from Iran, and he's going to be sharing about what the church inside Iran looks like. So I'm real excited about the Global Voices we're going to have this semester, and I'm so glad you joined us today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce John Rowland. He is an advancement officer here at Samford, and he's going to tell you more about this very unique and meaningful Global Voices we're having today.
Thank you, Dr. Parks. Again, my name is John Rowland, and I'm really honored to be here today. I'm a graduate of Samford. Travis Joins was a classmate of mine. I didn't know him well. I was a bit younger, but I looked up to him, and he was awfully kind to me, and through the generosity of his family. And today his mom and dad, Jane and David, and his brothers Shane and Tanya are here. So grateful to have them. One of his best friends, Keith Brown, is here. Grateful for him to come with his son Cameron's on staff and his wife, and Rick Camp, Shelby Baptist Director of Missions. And Ashton Holt is here. She's the recipient last year of the Travis Joins scholarships. So grateful. She's now at Beeson, a Beeson student. Through the generosity of the family, 1st of March of 2020, who would know what would happen? Something very good happened in March of 2020. The Travis Joins Endowed Scholarship was agreed upon. Through the generosity of the family, the way endowed scholarships work at Samford is when families come together, invest. It's an investment, and we never touch the principal. Through the generosity of the family, the interest from the investment is what funds the scholarship every year. And in perpetuity, long past I'm here, I'm gone, past my kids, grandkids, for generations, this scholarship will be supporting students. It is focused strictly for undergraduate students that are preparing for international missions. And so someone who is called to international missions like Travis and it's selected by the chair of the Christian Ministry Program, which Dr. Scott Guffin is our chair of the Christian Ministry Program at Samford. I'm very honored to be here, thrilled about this program, and I'm glad to turn it over to Travis's father-in-law, Pastor Al Gilbert.
Okay. All right, I'm going to try to use this other mic. I think that's working. So it's good afternoon for me because I'm on Eastern time, and I'm really glad to see you here. And there's a clock at the back, and I know that I'll be watching it, and I'll also notice when you're leaving. So there'll be no problem there. I'm gonna skip over childhood. You'll need to talk to this other crew right here that they'll tell you a little more about Travis and his childhood. I first met Travis over 25 years ago. He was a student at Southeastern Seminary. We stopped by Wake Forest to see our daughter that was in school, and we took a lot of students out to eat. That's what parents do when they stop by and see children at college, right? And so we were able to do that. There was a group of them, 6 or 8, so we just heard in general everyone's story, kind of where they grew up, and casually, I remember that I think Travis had on a Tennessee hat, and I'm a Georgia fan, and then I all of a sudden realized when I was planning to say that you're playing Georgia this weekend, so don't throw anything at me, all right? But I teased Travis that night, never realizing that he and my daughter were starting a relationship. And so when we got the call that they wanted to come visit for the weekend, we thought, well, this may be further along than we thought. You know, they're finally including us in this. And so I remember we really talked that weekend. Travis came to our home there in Virginia for a weekend visit. He arrived on a Friday afternoon, and we immediately left to go play 9 holes of golf at a nearby course. My son and I were planning to go, so we waited on Travis. He'd traveled 3 hours from North Carolina up there to Virginia, and he still seemed very eager to go play golf. And I looked at him, I thought, well, he looks kind of athletic, but you know, I really don't know what we're getting into. And then he went to the back of his car and took out his own clubs. Now, it bothered me a little bit that he carried his clubs in his car just in case he could play golf, because I'm not really a golfer. And so we went out to play, and I was expecting to lose. And so when we got, and I'll tell you more about that. We got there that day, and I asked Travis to ride in the car with me, and so he jumped in the car with me so I could hear his story. He told me a little bit about where he grew up. He told me that he loved his family, and he told me that he knew his family loved him. And it was really interesting to hear how he came to know Christ, where he went to school, and what was the stirring in his heart that moved him to go to seminary. Now, we talked about his future, and his call wasn't quite clear at that point. He said that he remembered that his grandfather had been a bivocational pastor, and he really didn't have this desire to be a pastor of a big mega church, but he wanted to go somewhere that no one else wanted to go. And so he was thinking bivocational, or maybe even in those days we called it the frontier. I don't know why we did, but to go out west into church planting in a place that nobody would go. Now, I noticed he could really hit the golf ball. But that day it seemed to be going everywhere except in the fairway. And he was hitting it everywhere, and it was on about, we just finished 4 holes, we were only playing 9. We just finished 4 holes, and we came up to the 5th, and there was a traffic jam. For those of you that play golf, you know what I mean. We hit one of those points where it backed up on the tee box, and I put my arm up around him on the seat, and I said, now Travis, listen, I could never respect a guy that let his girl's father win. And so if you're holding back on me, it's time for you to decide you're going to play like you really can play and see if you can beat me. And that was a big mistake because at that point, every ball he hit was right perfectly in the fairway. Every putt went in the hole. And for the next 5 holes, I'm convinced he played the best 5 holes of his life, and he just beat us all that afternoon. And I've never let him live that down after that day, because I said, listen, you really were holding back trying to make me feel good. A great friendship developed. I always enjoyed my time with Travis. I decided to write as much of this down as possible because I don't want to cry through all this, all right? But it seemed like we always had a way to find something to talk about that mattered. He told me about Samford, and family, if I'm wrong, I didn't check this with you, but this is how I remember what he said. He said that he came down here to visit his buddy Jeff Cate, who was already a student, and that he really didn't have any desire to come here. But when he left that weekend, he had something stirring in his heart. He said it was an easy decision because I could tell that that's really where God wanted me to be. After he graduated from Samford, he worked a while between college and seminary, and then God began stirring his heart for the next phase of ministry, and that's when I met him at Southeastern. Now, I'm confident that Travis would be very uncomfortable with what we're doing here today, making this all about him, because that's not the kind of guy he was. So I found myself imagining a conversation, him saying to me, now, Al, don't make this all about me. And me saying, but Travis, that's the point, all right? This scholarship is about you. And so he probably would then respond with something like, well, at least be sure to quote the Apostle Paul and tell them that nothing is good in my flesh, and that God is at work in you both the willing to do for his good pleasure, and that I am what I am by the grace of God. So whichever verse he might have wanted me to choose, I decided to choose another verse to talk about how God worked in him to turn his heart toward missions, and how God worked through him when he went to the neglected places without fear. So wrapping my thoughts around those verses, I decided to choose this verse. It's 1 Peter 4:10. And it says, each one of us has received a special gift. Put it to work serving one another as good stewards of the multifaceted grace of God. Now, I'd like to unpack that for just a minute and then show you how I want to let that be the verse where I hang my thoughts. So as we zoom in, the three parts. God gives his children special gifts. He wants us to use those gifts in serving others. And he wants us to sense that we all have a stewardship of life, a stewardship of grace. Now notice grace is used at the beginning and end. It says each one of us has received a special gift. And the word that's used there for you Greek scholars, which I'm not, but I'm mean with an interlinear, by the way, all right? But it says that we've each been given a grace gift, charismata. We've each been given a gift by grace. Some translations, though, take it a step further and say that it's a unique gift. It's a special gift. I guess they're taking that from the each part of the verse. Each of us have received a special gift. Then it ends with grace. It says that we're to be stewards of the multifaceted grace of God. Interesting choice of words. James uses it when he says that we encounter various trials and temptations. And if you've studied it, you know it means multicolored. We get our word variegated from it. But here it says that God pours his work through our lives in a multicolored way. Now picture this. A little kid coloring with red and blue, and then it seems to run together and they kind of run all over each other. And I really believe that that's kids' version is a good picture for us to have in our minds when it comes to a multicolored grace. A pastor in California developed a way to describe our giftedness, and he used the word shape. How many of you have heard that explanation? Just kind of do your head like this, so I know you're listening. Well, there's at least 5 of you, all right? So let me explain it to you. I'm giving him credit. I tried to improve on it so I wouldn't have to give him credit, but I couldn't improve on it. So I'm giving him credit, but Rick says it this way. We each have a spiritual gift, a heart, we have a ability, we have a personality, and we have life experiences. Shape. Spiritual gift, heart, ability, personality, experience. Did I spell it right? I think that's it, all right? Now, take those and let me use that to talk about how God poured grace through Travis's life, and it became a beautiful picture in vivid color. First, let's talk about the discovery process. I noticed a couple things about him that really stood out. He loved maps, and he loved history. Now, maybe it's hard for you to imagine these days where everybody pulls out their iPhone out of their pocket whenever they have a spare moment, all right? It's fun to watch how people almost run over each other in public places because they can't quit looking at their phone. But this was in the day before, gasp, before we had iPhones, okay? Travis was that old, okay? We didn't have iPhones. So he kept in his pocket often 1 or 2 things. Maybe a pocket New Testament that he could pull out. But the strange thing was he kept in his pocket a pocket-sized atlas of maps. And I would notice sometimes he would be looking at the maps. I said, Travis, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm just reminding myself which country borders with that country, and I'm reminding myself something about the history of that country and how the unreached people groups are there and what they believe and how generations they've been under the control of religions and governments that held the gospel at arm's length, and he had command on his maps better than anybody I've ever known. Family, would you agree? I mean, the boy knew how to find things on a map. But it was more than a blend of cartography and history. It was God at work in his life to open the mind of a young man and help him see things in a different light, and this light put a drive in his heart. As I said earlier, he was driven to do something different, to go to the hard places. Now, this was the mid-90s when we were all discovering what I came to call God's heart for the nations. Most of you just kind of grew up with that as an awareness that one day every tribe, tongue, nation, and people will be before the throne. But it's like that had been hidden from the church for a while, and all of a sudden we started discovering verses in our Bible that we didn't know were there. That God wanted to be worshiped by all ethnicity. And we started seeing that, and that was happening on the campus of Southeastern. And I watched this happen to that young man who liked history and maps. And he started asking me, why not me? What would keep me? I told you I wrote it down. What would keep me from going to the unreached? So he took world geography, world history, poured it through the lens of world evangelism, and he discovered there was a process where he could get to the field even quicker. In those days, Southeastern had a pathway called 2+2. It's where you could go and take your last 2 years on the mission field and get 2 years of mission credit and get 2 years of seminary credit and kind of finish it all. And that would get him there sooner. But Travis was not only watching God do a work in his life to, by grace, color in his heart, but Travis was ready to put it to work serving others. I remember the day he was fearless and eager as he boarded the plane to go to the Middle East. I remember it so well because, once again, for you students, you're going to find this hard to believe, but prior to 9/11, you could walk somebody to the gate and see them off. And my wife and I had walked down to the gate, and Travis and my daughter had the audacity to take our grandson and leave. Well, it was their son. But they walked down, and I held it together until we turned to walk away. And then I started crying and told my wife, I'm so glad they want a place that's never heard to know about Jesus. It was an honor to let them go. I remember going to visit. They couldn't keep me away. At that time, I was on staff at the International Mission Board myself. And I was doing mobilization, and I specifically was doing mobilization a lot for Northern Africa and the Middle East. And so I was able to go and see them. I'd already been to that city once. As a matter of fact, I couldn't decide if I wanted to share this part, but I may have an extra minute here. I had been asked by the Northern Africa Middle East team to start a prayer movement to see if we could pray to get some workers into 3 countries where we had no workers. And I remember Travis came to me one morning at breakfast. He'd spent up the night in our house. He said, so could I maybe not go with my class to South Asia and instead go to the Middle East? I said, yeah, but you'd get me in a lot of trouble because your prof's already got this figured out, and he's going to think I talked you into this. But if you're going to do it, here's who you need to contact. And so they were going to a place where we had cared deeply about, and it was an answer to our prayers. So God had worked in him to color in that grace, but now I want to describe his service with a couple of more colors. First, he was a friend maker. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it's one I heard a guy use years ago, and I thought, nothing better describes Travis than that. He never met a stranger. Anyone that he met, he found a way to start finding out something about their life, a master of asking questions, and because he knew the map so well, he could talk to you about where you were from, and he could talk to you about things that had happened there. And I watched him when I visited him. First thing he did is he took me to his landlord's house. Mr. Safdie, a wealthy landlord. He insisted that we drink tea, and he had to tell me all about his friendship with Travis. But his friendship was not limited to the well-educated or the wealthy. Now, he could hold his own there, all right? But that's not what he preferred. He preferred the neglected, or as Jesus called him, the least of these. I saw great delight in his eyes when he introduced me to Saeed. Saeed was his concierge. It's hilarious that they call it that, concierge, in the apartment where he lived. Saeed was from a neighboring country. He slept on a cot beside the elevator in the car park. But when we walked out and Travis was so excited to introduce me to Saeed, Saeed was trying to learn English and Travis was trying to learn Arabic, and it was fun to listen to them try to talk. And then when he introduced him to me, he looked at me, he said, Abu Elliot. That's my grandson's name. And he was so happy to meet me and so happy to meet Travis's father-in-law. But my best memory of that, watching him friend maker with the least of these, was when I went on the next visit when Edie, my granddaughter, was born there. And I was able to go and visit, and we woke up in the morning and Travis said, hey, come go with me to the bakery to get some bread. I said, okay. He said, I do this every morning. Come go with me. So we go out, we start up the street. He said, before we get there, I want to tell you the story of this guy. Said he's not following Christ yet, but every time I go in there, if there's no one there, he wants to talk to me about what I believe. He said, and just last week, we got to the point of the conversation that I was able to explain why Jesus had to die on the cross and how he was raised from the dead and how we could have faith in him and live forever. And he came this close to trusting Christ. And finally he said, I can't. My family, my friends, I just can't. Then Travis stopped and he said, but before we go in, I want you to watch his face. He can't believe I keep coming back. The first time I went back, he said, but I told you no, that I cannot follow Jesus. He said, I know, but we're friends. And if we're friends, I'm going to keep coming here. And by the way, you do have the best bread in town, but I wanted to come here because I'm still your friend. Wow. Friend maker who loved the least of these. After a couple of years on the field, they came back home and they were appointed to go back as vocational missionaries at a church here in Birmingham. I remember I was there. And this time they were going to train 2-year workers who needed experience in learning culture and sharing their faith. And Travis's job was to line them up to go to multiple countries in Northern Africa and the Middle East and to experience culture shock and the things they needed when they couldn't speak the language to see if they really were cut out to be missionaries. Eventually, they wound up in the Arabian Peninsula, a desert town with a university. I went there because another baby was on the way, and this time with a problem pregnancy, my wife had to go early to be there with my daughter. I went there for a week, trying to wait on Maggie to be born, but she was a little stubborn and finally came after I left. But I saw it again, the friend maker with the least of these. This time, as we went out for a walk, he said, I want to introduce you to a friend right over here. And we went to a rug merchant. This particular part of the Arabian Peninsula is extremely extremely wealthy. Extremely wealthy. Rolls Royce in the airport. But I'll just leave it at that. All right? It's an extremely wealthy place. But this rug maker was from a country over in South Asia. And he was despised there. Totally rejected by those people. But not by Travis. Travis had made friends with him. And Mohammed was so glad to meet Travis's father-in-law. And he told me in his broken English how much he appreciated his friendship and how much he meant to him. They returned to the field after that term, and Travis encountered some really bad news. Special needs with family and kids' education hindered their return to the field. I'd be less than candid if I didn't tell you that Travis was devastated. This was the first time I ever saw him discouraged. I'd never seen it before. He made every possible appeal during the stateside, and when they had to go on leave of absence, he continued to make appeals, and it didn't work. And ultimately, he had to get his mind around the fact that he was not going back to the mission field. He felt like God had made him to live overseas. I couldn't disagree with him. I watched him as he taught Anglo Sunday school class. He tried to love those rich white people, and it just frustrated him that he couldn't go back to the people that no one else would go to. He finally adjusted his work to work with refugees and immigrants. And as I talked with his daughter, my granddaughter Edie, just the other day, I told her about I was coming down here. And she laughed and she said, make sure you tell them how every time we would go out in public, Travis would try to guess where people were from. And we would encounter someone of ethnicity, or we could hear it in their language, and he would walk up and say, let me guess. And he said it was so weird how he seemed to always get it right. And then Edie laughed some more. She said, like the time we talked to the lady and he guessed she was from South Africa. And she said, nobody ever guessed South Africa. They always guessed Great Britain. He said, but I can tell the difference. Because he can make that kind of discernment and differentiation in their background. With the internationals, he came alongside the work of a North American Mission Board missionary there in Winston-Salem. I called David just the other day to tell him that I was coming down here. I knew he'd be excited about this, and he wanted to pray for me. He said, but can I call you back? Because I've got some guys in the car right now, and I'll call you back in a few minutes and talk to you about it. When he called me back, he said, he called me Pastor. Sometimes I think that's my first name. He said, Pastor, I had Juan in the car with me, and when he heard you mention the name Travis, he wanted to tell me something. And he reminded me of the day when we were having a meeting, and Juan walked in, and what he didn't know is I looked at Travis and said, I have talked to Juan 15 times about trusting Jesus. I can't ever seem to get it clear. Why don't you take your turn? And he said, Travis went aside with him. They went in a room. He said, they stayed in there a little while. And when they came out, Juan came straight to me, David said, and said, I finally understand. I've trusted Jesus. So just this week, I think it was, when I told David, he said, Juan said, be sure and tell him that Travis not only led me to know Jesus, but Travis taught me and discipled me, and now I am a disciple maker, Juan said. Friend maker. For the least of these. I was really shocked to hear of his liver disease. I'd gone up to Winston-Salem. We were not living there anymore at the time, and I'd gone up there for a graduation of one of those grandchildren. I remember standing in the parking lot and looking at Travis and saying, "Travis, you really don't look good." He said, "Well, gee, thanks." I said, "No, I mean, your skin is yellow. What's wrong with you?" He said, "Well, I wasn't going to talk about it, but they're running some tests on me, and I'm going to the hospital this week, and they're going to run all these tests, and they're trying to figure out what's wrong with me. They think it's my liver." He got back to me and said, "It's a rare liver disease. For those of you who know anything about medicine, they have a fancy word they put in front of it, meaning we don't know what caused it. And we never expected that liver disease to go that fast." In August, he said, "It's getting really bad, and they're putting me on a list for a liver transplant." He said, "Maybe within the next year." Boy, was I shocked in September to hear he's on his deathbed. If you want to see him, you need to come. We were there with his family around the bed when he passed. That day, I got down beside him on the bed, labored breathing. He was not really talking. And I've always been told as pastor that they hear and know a whole lot more than you think. So just go ahead, and if you got something to say it. I said, "Travis, you know God loves you, right?" Jane, I don't know if you were there at that moment, but he shouted, "Yes!" First thing I heard him say. Eyes closed, still seemed incoherent. And I said, "I know you're tired. Are you ready to go to heaven?" He shouted, "Yes!" According to my old man standards, he was a young man. But I don't want to see him in heaven one day and him say to me, "Why didn't you ask those students to take my place?" I don't know what made you want to come to a Global Voices meeting, besides a little college credit maybe, but I got to challenge you. You are not supposed to in any way try to emulate this man, because you are unique. Spiritual gifts and heart and abilities and personality and experiences, good and bad, all poured together by the grace of God. But he is coloring a masterpiece in your life. And I would like to challenge you today, whether you're the future recipient of a scholarship or not, let the grace of God move you to see a world that needs Christ. And let the grace of God be poured through you as you put it to work as a good steward of God's grace in you. Nobody told me how to end, but I'm a pastor, so I'm going to pray for you, all right? So let's just pray. Father, I thank you for the occasion that brings us here to honor Travis, and we know that we give honor to whom it's due. We thank you that he was fearless and passionate about going places that others did not want to go. And Lord, I pray for those listening today that they would be encouraged by the testimony of his life and challenged by the early death, or so it seems, humanly speaking, and that they would be willing to let you color on the canvas of their heart a testimony of your grace. In Jesus' name, amen.